It was 7 a.m. 2 days after Christmas in 2005. A 911 operator received a call and hears dead silence on the other line, and that couldn't be more true. Death was among the caller, but no one knew that yet. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Kimbyrleigha, and today we're going to be taking a look at another holiday homicide. After a 911 call comes in December 27th at 7 a.m., there seems to be no one on the other line. But all of a sudden, the operator hears the faint sound of rustling and then could clearly hear a child saying the word mama over and over again.
911, what is your emergency? Christmas Cross Sheriff's Office. Got an open line here with no sound at all. I'm sure maybe the parents are upstairs.
Deputies from Lee County Sheriff's Office go ahead and do a wellness check at the address associated with the phone call. When police showed up at a home in a quiet, small, gated community of Gateway in Fort Myers, Florida, they were welcomed by a 2-year-old toddler with white, blood-soaked socks and bloody clothes standing in the living room all alone. The house belonged to Stephen and Michelle Andrews, a young couple that moved to the area about a year ago from Minnesota. Both were only 28 years old, and their son, Lucas, was 2. Police noted the living room was full of open Christmas presents and holiday decorations, but there was an icy stillness in the air. Deputies made their way upstairs to the master bedroom, where they made a horrifying discovery. Blood was everywhere. It was on the walls, the dressers, and a big pool of blood was on the carpet and all over the bed. Most of the blood was on one side of the bed, where Stephen Andrews lay face down on a blood-soaked mattress with a hole in his head. Michelle was found completely naked, with her body twisted into a grotesque position on the floor at the foot of the bed. One of the female deputies that arrived on scene took Stephen and Michelle's little boy over to the closest neighbor's house. When the neighbor opened the door, she asked him if it would be okay if he looked after the little boy until backup arrived, and the neighbor was completely confused. He didn't know what was going on, and he asked, why? What happened? The only thing the deputy could get out of her mouth was, they're dead. That's the only thing she could mutter after what she saw in that house. Neighbors and investigators were completely baffled because they didn't understand how a couple that was in the prime of their life, that seemed to be smart and kind and successful, could be killed in such cold blood. They were there for 1 year, so no one could imagine them having any enemies that would do this to them. But could they? Steve and Michelle met on their first day of college. After their first date, they knew they were meant for one another. They were married on June 24th in 2000. Michelle worked at Adena Health in Minnesota, while Steve worked on his master's degree. They were blessed with the birth of Lucas Stephen Andrews on October 8th, 2003. Michelle always lived life to the fullest, and once they had their son Lucas, her motherly instincts kicked right in. She said whenever she looked at her son Lucas, it was like Christmas. They moved to Fort Myers after Stephen was offered a job that he could not pass up. Fort Myers, Florida is a popular destination known for its beaches, fishing, shopping, and also home to 2 of my favorite vacation destinations, Sanibel and Captiva Islands. I frequently visited Sanibel Island as a child. I am a native Floridian. Been in California for about 8 years. Michelle was a nutritionist and was working in her field as a director of nutritional services at Manor Care in Fort Myers, an assisted living and specialized rehab center for senior citizens. Stephen had been working as a project manager at Bonita Springs Landscaping Company. As a matter of fact, everyone around them described them as very cordial, smart, kind, successful, and they just couldn't understand how anyone could kill them in cold blood. Investigators wasted no time processing the crime scene to find out what exactly happened to Stephen and Michelle that fateful night. Their home was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-story house with a lanai, pool, and garage. Inside, it was brightly painted and full of evidence that it was Christmas time. A decorated Christmas tree stood by a window. A little nativity scene was seen on a small table right near the door, and a teddy bear was wearing a Christmas tree sweater and set out at the foot of their staircase. But the bedroom was a completely different story. The first thing that could be seen by investigators were a pair of nude legs. Michelle was put in what investigators described as a grotesque position with her arms and her legs outstretched, in what seemed to be some kind of message from the killer. Michelle had also been beaten very badly. Her face was severely injured. Her lips were cut and bruised. Her forehead had lacerations that reached all the way to her skull. At this point, the investigators conclude that this was a personal crime of rage and anger, and because her body was found naked, they also assume that this could be a crime that was sexual in nature. They also wondered if this could be domestic violence gone too far, and possibly Steve was in a rage and this was a murder-suicide. It was also apparent that Michelle fought back, and she fought hard. Her fingers and her hands showed signs of an intense struggle. It looked like she had grabbed onto the bed sheet, the dresser, the wall, anything she could use to gain leverage against her killer. But unfortunately, she was no match for whoever did this to her. However, if it wasn't for a few brave neighbors who gave very detailed observations, the police wouldn't have been able to put together a timeline of Michelle and Steve's murder. The neighbors that were closest to them in proximity said that they'd never heard anything that showed the couple were committing domestic violence against one another. They saw nothing out of the ordinary except for one neighbor who said that there was some kind of dispute over a brand new car that Steve had recently bought. Steve brought home a brand new Mercury Marauder, and this was seen as more of a luxury vehicle. Steve's friends claimed that after he bought this car, his personality and demeanor changed. The couple was very conservative with money, so even though they lived in a gated community and they had a really nice house, you can tell by their furnishings, or lack thereof, in my opinion, that they were not very flashy. This may have been why Michelle was so upset over the vehicle, but we will not know for sure. All we do know is that one of the neighbors saw them having an intense discussion right near the car when Steve brought the car home. Later, the neighbor said that Steve came over and explained to him that Michelle was pissed because he bought this new car. Upon further inspection of the house, there were hints that everything was not exactly perfect in Steve and Michelle's relationship. There was actually a Post-it note found inside of a phone book that was right next to marriage counselors. Stephen's body was pulled off of the bed and he was found face down on the carpet. There was blood and bloody handprints found on the turquoise wall nearby. An autopsy report showed that Steve died of a single gunshot wound to the head. Investigators believe he was sleeping when this occurred, and they found one bullet underneath his pillow. But in order for the domestic violence theory to hold up, they had to find the gun nearby one of the bodies. When they failed to find a gun nearby, that theory was ruled out. But while they were searching, they realized that there was a sliding glass door leading from the pool into the living room, and it looked like it had been broken into. Not only that, there was a door that had been previously broken that led from their backyard into their pool area. So this is where authorities think that the perpetrator came in. So this is when they start to canvass the rest of the neighborhood looking for clues, and there's another neighbor that comes forward. He says that the night of the murders, he had his headphones on his computer, and he was downloading family videos from Christmas when his cousin that was staying with him came into his room and said, "Who is doing all of that yelling?" He took off his headphones and he listened, but by that time, the screaming had stopped. They believe that this is when the murder occurred. Another neighbor came forward and said he didn't hear any screams, but he did hear something. he heard a loud muffler coming from a motorcycle that was speeding down the entryway into the community. He was wondering why somebody was going that fast at around 2 or 3 a.m., but he kind of shrugged it off and didn't think much of it until now. When the first neighbor was questioned again, he said he also heard the motorcycle, but not only that, he saw it. He said that he wondered why someone was going that fast at that time. So he looked around and he saw a yellow motorcycle parked behind Michelle and Steven's home. The thing is, I looked at recent photos of their house, like an aerial view, and I could also see that they had this backyard with no driveway that wrapped around and no place to actually park a motorcycle except for in the grass. So I don't know about you, but that would seem really out of place if I saw something like that at my neighbor's house. But the neighbor explained he just thought because it was the holidays that they had a guest over or a friend over, so he didn't think much of it. I also took note that the entryway road was actually right behind Steve and Michelle's house. And I'm not really sure, but it seems like if you were on foot, you could possibly bypass the gate and not have to put in a code in order to get into the community, but I can't be sure. The same neighbor that said he saw the motorcycle said his mother had also seen the motorcycle that night. She said not only did she see the motorcycle, but she saw a man walking around in a camouflage jacket with the hood of the jacket pulled up over his head so you couldn't see his face. He got on the motorcycle and drove away. Police decide to ask local businesses if anyone has a surveillance video of a man on a motorcycle on the night of the murders. They get a hit from a 7-Eleven store. There was a video showing a man on a motorcycle. The only bad thing was that the video's resolution was really, really bad. So the police put this out to the public, hoping that someone would recognize this man. At the same time, investigators started to interview Michelle and Steve's friends, coworkers, family members, anyone that had close connections with the couple. They wanted them to shed some light on what their lives were like leading up to their deaths. Steve's parents were visiting from Minnesota for the holidays, and they were not on good terms with Michelle. Michelle had recently revealed a very dark secret that she had been keeping. Michelle was having an affair while Steven was getting his master's degree back in Minnesota. Not only was she having an affair with another man, but she got pregnant with this man's baby. She ended up having an abortion, but she felt so guilty that she actually confessed this to Steve. Okay, I don't know about you, but I find this to be very stupid. You can just, please don't come for me. But I feel like I don't condone cheating. But if you do something bad and you know it's bad and you turn from your ways and you know you're not going to do it again and you can learn from the situation, I don't think you need to tell your partner. But that's just me. Maybe some people think that's healthy, but in this case, I don't think she should have done that. And this is also one reason why they wanted to move to Florida after Steve got offered this job. They figured they could have a new start, they could kind of have a clean slate, and it seemed like their relationship was finally on the mend. So when investigators find out that Michelle had an affair, they start to assume that her former lover could have been responsible for the murders. Maybe he had some unfinished business with Michelle and he came into town to carry out this crime. Maybe this is who they saw on the motorcycle that night. So they contact Minnesota police to get more information, and Minnesota police actually do a background check on Michelle, and they find out that she was dating a male nurse at her previous place of employment in Minnesota, but this former lover was still living in Minnesota and he was still there at the time of the crime, so there's no way he was involved. What's even more confusing is that they don't find any foreign DNA on the top portion of the couple's home, nor do they find any foreign DNA in the bedroom where the couple was killed. However, when an autopsy was performed on Michelle, they found foreign DNA on her nightgown and under the fingernails of her right hand. I always think this, ladies, scratch. Always scratch. I know it sounds a little weird, but if anything were to happen to you, that is where they seem to always find evidence. The medical examiner confirms the cause of death for both Steven and Michelle, Stephen had died from a single gunshot wound to the head, and Michelle had had severe blunt force trauma but died of asphyxiation from strangulation. So investigators focus their time back on more tips that are coming in, and there's finally a lead. It's in reference to a holiday party that occurred in early December for the company that Steve worked for. Steve and Michelle went together, and they were actually seen having a casual conversation with another couple. It turns out this is a girl named Kelly. She's a 26-year-old coworker of Steven's, and her partner, Fred Cooper, that was 30 years old. While they were there was a company-wide gift exchange, but something very interesting happened. The gift that Kelly ends up giving to Steve causes Michelle to go off. It turns out Kelly gifts him a expensive luxury keychain that matches his luxury car. Michelle was shocked. She found this to be very inappropriate, and she actually pulls Kelly aside and confronts her about it. Again, why would you give this gift to this man in front of his wife? I find that to just be so dumb. Michelle comes right out and asks Kelly if she's having an affair with her husband. Kelly denies it, says, "No, we're not having an affair. He's just a coworker. I didn't think this was inappropriate, and I'm sorry." This was only a week before Steve and Michelle were found dead. So now investigators want to take a deeper look into Steven's work life and find out more about Kelly. They find out that she is very pretty. She has long blonde hair. She was smart, she was well-dressed, and she was very well put together. There was also some office rumors going around that not only were the couple exchanging emails, but they were also meeting up outside of work. Kelly's coworkers described her as a touchy-feely kind of girl, which I don't really know what that means, but they also said they thought that she was deliberately trying to make Michelle jealous at the holiday Christmas party. The investigators go ahead and pull up all the emails between Steve and Kelly, and lo and behold, they are salacious. They are racy. They're all about the sexual things that Steve and Kelly want to do to each other, but they also talk about how they want to be together as an official couple. They couldn't wait to start a new life together. And Steve wrote to Kelly, quote, "When I am an old man, I want to know that I was true to myself and shared a life with someone who wants to be with me as much as I want to be with them." The two of them had met in the summer of 2005, and they really bonded over talking about troubles in their relationships, about being parents, about having kids, and the relationship just got closer and closer. Steve had actually recently told Kelly that he planned to divorce Michelle after the holidays. But there was one email that really stood out to investigators, and this one was exchanged between Steve and Kelly the night before the murders. It turns out that they had met up to have sex in the office. At this point, Kelly is asked to come in because the police have many questions. When Kelly meets with investigators, she talks all about her previous relationship that she just broke off with Fred Cooper. She talks about how they've dated for 6 or 7 years and they have a 5-year-old daughter together. This is so weird because it's so similar to the last case, even the last name Cooper. If you haven't seen that one, I will leave the link in the description box. Kelly even tells police that she still lives with Fred because she didn't want the breakup to cause hardships during the holidays, and she said she would give him until the end of the year to move out, especially because they did have the 5-year-old daughter together, so they wanted to have a nice holiday. But Kelly still does not admit to the affair at all. She just keeps saying that Steve and her were close friends. There was nothing inappropriate going on. But as they started to press her and talk about the emails, she started to break, and she finally admits that Steve and her were having a romantic relationship. But she swears that the last time she saw him was, like the email said, the day before the murders, having sex at the office. She also gives them an alibi. She says on the night of the murders, she was at home asleep. The only problem is there are no witnesses and nobody can attest to that. She does tell detectives something interesting. She said, quote, "Just from the things that Steve has said to me about how Michelle can be and things and how she acted the last couple weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if she stepped over the deep end. Then she adds that Fred had no idea that the relationship was going on and that Michelle didn't either until about a week before Christmas when Michelle actually called Kelly and went off on her. At this point, not only investigators, but, with all the media reports coming out, the neighbors and everyone in the public was starting to think that Kelly had something to do with this because she was dating a married man that she knew had a child and she wanted a life with this man. But why, if that were true, why would she want to kill him? Can understand the wife, but why the man you want to actually spend your life with? And then who was on the motorcycle? Was that someone helping her carry out the crime and maybe they went too far? I don't know. As investigators were doing more digging, they actually found out that Michelle had not only confided in her own parents, but she had also told Stephen's parents about the inappropriate gift that Kelly had given to Steve, and she thought he was having an affair. She just let everything come out. Stephen's mom actually confronted him and asked him if he was having an affair, and he denied it. But at the same time, he goes on a canoeing trip the day before Christmas with Michelle's father, Dan, and he tells him he has feelings for someone at work, but says he hasn't acted upon them yet, and Michelle's dad does not pry. Michelle seems very sad and distraught. She explains that recently Steve had told her that he doesn't think he loves her anymore. And at this point, Michelle really thinks that her relationship is going to fall apart and that he's slipping away. Finally, police receive a call on December 28th that changes everything. A man that worked at a nearby motorcycle shop called Sun Sports calls in, and he talks about seeing a coworker that was viciously scrubbing a camouflage jacket with a whole bunch of different cleaning chemicals, and he was even taking a razor blade and cutting out the inner lining. And he was doing this at work where other coworkers could see him, which I just find so odd. If this was really the person that did this, why wouldn't they just throw away the jacket? Why? Why try to clean the jacket? Why don't you just throw it away? Oh my gosh, this is the kind of stuff we talk about in my other series called Critique a Killer. So if you're interested in giving your 2 cents, don't forget to be here in a couple days for that. It's completely live. We can discuss it in the comments. The chat will be completely open and I will highlight comments across the screen. The name of this coworker was very familiar to police. It was none other than Kelly's ex-boyfriend, Fred Cooper. He owned a camouflage jacket and he drove a yellow motorcycle. Wow, what a coincidence. So now they bring him in for questioning and he appears to be super nervous and tense. But he explains he just got out of a relationship with Kelly after about 6 or 7 years, that they have a 5-year-old daughter together and they were still living together. But he told detectives that he has nothing to do with this crime. And Kelly explained to investigators that Fred was not the jealous type and there was no inclination that he had any clue that there was a sexual relationship going on. But there's always someone else that comes forward in these cases, and one of Kelly's very good friends, Claudia, comes forward with contradictory evidence. She claims that Kelly was actually at her house the day that police found the bodies. She actually gets a phone call from Fred, and he says, "Bad news, something happened to Steve and Michelle. I think you should turn on the news." Kelly was just sitting there, according to Claudia, opening Christmas gifts from her mother. And when she finds out what happens, she is hysterical. But not only that, she said something very interesting to Claudia. She said this in reference to Fred, and she said to Claudia, quote, "I hope he didn't, but if he did, I hope they fry his ass." And this is when Kelly immediately calls Fred and asks him, "Where were you the night of the murder?" When the investigators take a deeper look at Fred Cooper, they find out that he has been in prison before. He was arrested several times in the 90s in Martin County for burglary and also for criminal mischief. He ended up serving 2 years in prison, and then when he gets out, he gets arrested again for breaking into a salvage yard. So after he served his sentence in prison, he was released and he was on probation until the year 2000. So of course, now Fred is their prime suspect, and they want to know what he was doing the day of the murders and what he was doing the day before the murders and the days leading up to the murders. So they call him in for questioning again. Coincidentally, he owns a black and yellow 2004 Suzuki SV650 motorcycle, which matched the description from the neighbors and the video from the 7-Eleven. Now, he says he has an alibi. His mother. And I don't know if you've heard this before, but there's a saying, never trust the mother, the lover, the brother, or the significant other. So, not credible. His mother tells the police that he was with her all evening, and she lives with Kelly and Fred in their townhouse with their 5-year-old daughter. But at this point, as you can probably tell, there is just so much circumstantial evidence that they ask Fred for a DNA sample, and he willingly does a swab of his DNA. They put him under the 24-hour surveillance, and then they get a warrant to search his house. And while they're searching it, everybody's calm. Fred's mom is fine. Nobody gave them any trouble. Fred seems indifferent and quiet, but they didn't give them any problems, and they didn't find anything linking Fred to the crime. They went through the whole house, and they didn't find anything connecting him to Michelle and Steve. Fred did decline to take a polygraph. I don't blame him because they're not really that accurate. Sometimes I think people's heart rate is just up because they're really, really scared. But he still denies any involvement in the crime. But then what was really suspicious is that a witness comes forward, and he works the gate of the gated community that Michelle and Steve live at. He saw a picture of Fred, and he says he recognizes him as a man that came into their community sales office asking for the gate code 2 days before Christmas at the community where Steve and Michelle lived. That's suspicious. That is, if that's him, it could have been someone else, but if that's him, that is super stupid. That's bad. Bad move. So I don't know why it took Kelly this long, but then she finally admits that maybe because things are closing in on Fred, but she finally admits that one night after she broke it off with Fred, she gets a text from Steve at about 11 o'clock at night, and Fred says, "Who is that? Who's texting you this late?" And it was Steve telling her to check her email. He started yelling at her, asking, who is she talking to? He was definitely really upset and yelling at her. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, or weird enough, or suspicious enough, Kelly explains that she saw Fred with a gun recently. It was right after the breakup, and Kelly tells police, "I was afraid of what he might do." The police said, "What do you mean? Explain what you mean by what he might do." And she said she was worried that he would take his life. She said that he just kept apologizing to her and saying he couldn't live without her. But then they had a conversation, and Kelly was able to calm him down. So the next day, he tells Kelly he threw the gun into the river. And subsequently, she goes through the whole house looking for the gun, and she never finds it, so she believes him. Then they test Fred's camouflage jacket, and it turns out there is no blood on it and no DNA. And then it got me thinking. I thought, okay, do I own a camo jacket? No, I don't. I don't own one. Does my fiance own one? No, he doesn't. But he owns a motorcycle, not a yellow one. But I started to think, are these things that other men typically own? Leave it in the comments. Do you or, your partner or anyone you know that is specifically a man have a motorcycle and a camo jacket? Because to me, I know it's somewhat rare, but on the other hand, is it? Because I know a lot of guys who drive motorcycles and also own a camo jacket, but there's a lot of other circumstantial evidence here. And that is why Fred was actually arrested on January 11, 2006. What really led police to decide to arrest him was that there were security cameras on Fred's community, and it showed Fred coming back through the gates of Village Walk community at around 3 a.m. the same night as the murders. So here's something that really gets to me, and it makes me really confused, and this is the part of trials and cases that really bring in that reasonable doubt. Fred had given the DNA sample, voluntarily given that, and when they tested the entire room, like I said, nothing was found there, nothing was found in the upper portion of the house, but when they tested Michelle, her nightgown and under her fingernails of her right hand, there was a DNA mixture found. And they stated it could include Fred's DNA. To me, could is not a very good word. Could does not give me confidence. And according to the report, it said that Stephen Andrews, Fred Cooper, or any other of their paternally related relatives cannot be ruled out. I don't know. If you know anything about DNA and you can understand this better, leave it in the comments. Explain why this would happen. But then Fred's DNA is excluded from Michelle's left hand fingernails. So maybe she only scratched him with her right hand? I don't know. Apparently there was enough evidence to indict Fred on 2 counts of premeditated murder and 1 count of burglary with assault and battery while armed. And his trial began October of 2006. So during the trial, prosecutors actually claim that Michelle, since she was so desperate to save her marriage, contacted Fred and let him know what was going on, hoping that he could talk some sense into Kelly and they could somehow save their relationships. So the crime scene technician said there were 2 phones found at Michelle and Steve's house that Michelle could have had access to. So they wanted to check these phones and the records and the call logs to find out, did she and Fred have any conversations? There was a cell phone in Michelle's purse, and then there was a cordless phone that just stayed inside the home. So it turns out, though, that Fred's phone numbers, his cell phone number and his work number, were not on either one of these phones' call logs. However, the technician that was examining the call log said that it only records incoming calls. So Michelle could have used it to call Fred. And this is important because Fred's defense lawyer claims that Fred and Michelle had a little secret of their own. They had been corresponding with one another, consoling one another with everything that was going on, and they actually met up for sex, consensual sex, the night before the murders in Michelle's Toyota 4Runner that was parked in front of the house. Fred claimed that Michelle called him that night because she found the emails between Kelly and Steve saying they had sex in the office. But then the crime scene investigators say that there were no bodily fluids, if you know what I mean, inside of the Toyota 4Runner, and there were no napkins, kind of gross, or anything inside that they could have used to clean up. To me, that doesn't really make sense. I'm just saying there are other ways in which that wouldn't really be left behind, but I'm just giving you the facts. But the 4Runner was never dusted for fingerprints, and CSI explains they were never instructed to dust for fingerprints. So again, reasonable doubt. And then there were people who knew Kelly and Fred, and they said they would have never suspected anything like this. Like, the things they were hearing in the media seemed to be shocking to them. There was one neighbor that said, Fred was always cordial. He would say hi. Fred would say hi back. And, one of the neighbors was just quoted saying, God, I just never would have thought that would happen. And that's why I think these cases are so intense, because we think, can this happen to me? That's what I always think about Chris Watts' case. It's like, seem like a normal couple. And that's why I'm terrified. I'm always telling Scott, do not get into a relationship with someone else. I'm not even worried about the cheating and, whatever. I'm worried about the person hurting me or their significant other finding out and hurting me and my family, because I hear this over and over and over again. But with Fred's trial, it actually ended in a hung jury. After 32 hours of deliberation, the jury just could not come to a conclusion about whether Fred was guilty. There was a second trial 2 years later, and this time Fred actually took the witness stand. Don't know if that was a good idea. Kelly also took the stand, and she said that Fred had threatened to kill himself and he wasn't home the night of the murders. Here's what the prosecution believes. They believe that Fred became aware of the affair and he was completely distraught. Not only that, he was distraught over the end of him and Kelly's relationship. He wanted to get revenge on Steve. He rode his motorcycle over to Michelle and Steve's house, whether he went through the back or the gate, I don't know. But he pulled his motorcycle out back. He went through the broken door to the patio. He somehow broke into the sliding glass door and he crept up to their bedroom while they were asleep, shot Steve in the head, and then took out all of his anger on Steve's wife just to get him back. He beat her repeatedly over the head and then strangled her to death. They kept saying that he just vented all of his anger and rage on Michelle. And it's really sad because not only did this couple lose their lives, but their son was left parentless. And there's one more thing that a lot of people don't think Fred was planning on, and that's coming face to face with the couple's 2-year-old child. People don't believe that the 2-year-old called 911. They believe that because Fred was also a father, he had compassion on this little boy, dialed 911, hoping that paramedics or cops would get there as soon as possible. This time, the jury only takes 6 hours before finding him completely guilty of 2 counts of premeditated murder and 1 count of burglary with assault and battery while armed. He is sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. The judge presiding over the case, Thomas S. Reeve, told Fred, quote, "It is the intention of this court that you never again be able to look at the light of day except through steel bars and barbed wire." Fred actually showed very little emotion when the sentence was delivered. He stood before the bench with his hands handcuffed in his orange jumpsuit, and he just stared directly ahead with 4 deputies and his attorney surrounding him. So what do you think? What are your thoughts? Do you think he did it? Do you think there's more to the story? Do you think that was him at the community trying to get the gate code? Because that would really make this premeditated. If you want to discuss it more, don't forget to be here in a couple days for Critique a Killer, where we're going to be live discussing this case, going over everything, and you will have a chance to voice your opinion, and I will put your comments up on the screen. I will also highlight one of your comments below if you have something very interesting to add to this case. I'm so excited that you're here with me. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you like true crime and murder mysteries. And you can also follow me on Instagram, or you can join my VIP community. We talk all about true crime on our private Discord, and you could get the chance to come on my channel and do a case of your choice. All those details will be below in the description box. Thank you so very much for watching. I will see you very soon with another case.